Hello, guys. Thank you very much for coming. A couple of small disclaimers before I go into the thick of it. First, there isn't such a thing as the perfect community. It was a suggested title, but we'll go into why that is and actually why understanding that is important. And the second one is that since this is a no shop and it's a little bit more about how to, I'm going to go into a bit of content. I'm also going to go into a bit of theory, and I'm going to be speaking fast. If you don't understand anything, that's perfectly fine. The idea is to raise more questions rather than to give answers, and perhaps to ignite a couple of ideas there. So very quickly about what I do right now and what we do with Conductal. So we're an organization design consultancy, meaning that we help companies to structure themselves so they can enable collaboration at scale. And that has a range of impacts. And community building is roughly the last stage of the process that we engage in. So without further ado, I'm going to go into why community is important, why it's something that we're actually discussing these days. Then I'm going to go into what actually we mean by community, and finally give you a framework to think about the design of community. So we're not talking so much about community management here, the day-to-day operations, or how to start a community, but really how we design the environment to allow communities to form. And it will make a little bit more sense as we go through the thick of it. So in general, the world has been changing a lot, and we have a series of incentives that now come to the forefront that make community particularly relevant. A big part of that is because we used to have loads of local communities. We used to know our neighbors. It was something that we delve in all the time, and now geography is a lot less important, thanks to the advancement of communication technology and travel technology. And also, thanks to this stuff, we're in a world that's a lot more competitive, that's a lot noisier as well, because we have people from all over the place trying to participate, to sell stuff, to share their point of view, and so on. And that creates a lot of complexity. And since there is so many actors in the market at a global scale being connected, as well, the trends, information flows from one side to the other very quickly, and then you have loads of emergent behaviors that happen really quickly. So we're forced to react to this kind of panorama of loads of stuff there all the time. And in general, the strategy that we go to as a society, as business, as organizations, is to try to communicate in a simpler way what it is that we do and what's the value, so people can actually understand, and that's the way we try to cut through the noise. So we try to simplify and simplify a lot, and as well, because there is a lot of competition, we try to specialize. So we try to become very, very good at just one thing. And then, hence the bubbles, actually, their cells, is this idea that even though what you're trying to do can be really complex, you need to put an interface that is very easy to interact with. So you can actually cut through the noise, and people will engage with what you're doing, even if they don't have a lot of time. And hence the concept of the API, which would be the equivalent in software. And we see that also happening at the level of organizations. And what this does is that then suddenly, because we're only doing a small bit of what a business would be, is that we have complete businesses but incomplete organizations, in the sense that we do one part, we focus on doing that very well, and then we rely on partners, we rely on other people to supply the other components of whatever it is that we're trying to do. And as that happens, we say complete businesses, incomplete organizations. And that means that partnerships, that our capacity to collaborate with others, or capacity to establish relationships based on trust that are actually effective, becomes incredibly important. And since we have to build these relationships, and as well we have to cycle through these relationships, because as the market changes really quickly, and companies grow, diminish, and so on, what was good at one stage, when we were perhaps very small, won't be good in 1 year. So we have to change a lot of our partners, and we have to build new relationships, we have to access new expertise. So we need to become very good at finding a way to collaborate with a wide number of people, and to build effective collaborations really quickly. And so a lot of this is about how good can we be, and how quickly can we reach a relationship of trust, where we understand the needs of each other, we understand how each other operate. And in that sense, what helps a lot is to have a group of people that you know you can trust. And so communities start becoming increasingly more important for businesses. So what a community enables, and here I'm not talking only about, say, a platform where you have loads of users. I'm actually talking about the theoretical definition of community. I'll explain that a little bit more, what it exactly means. But the important concept for now is that community is something that is different from an organization, and it exists across the barriers. And you can create communities for users, where you engage them, you create platforms for advocacy, you can create communities for talent, for your employees, or even for recruitment, so would-be employees or alumni, people who were employees before. So Zappos did something really interesting in this stage where they keep their alumni together in a community with those who would apply for a job. And this way, they start to interact with them, they start to onboard them into the philosophy of the organization even before they have been hired. And that way, once they're hired, there is a lot more value alignment, they understand a lot better what's the problem, the concern, the mindset, the culture, and so on, and they hit the ground running. As well, with suppliers and partners, you can build communities, you can build those relationships and actually start working on the other person organization. Loads of the really big food manufacturers do this, and they actually help some of their partners to work on their supply chain for free, just because they know that that cost cutting will trigger down to their business and to the end user, so they can have a better value proposition. And finally, you can also have alignment with investors and shareholders who would understand what's the ultimate purpose that you're trying to do, will understand your business case, will agree with your values, and won't try to change the CEO and change the culture of the organization halfway through a critical point because they lose faith in you. So there is a range of benefits that you can have, but what actually is it? What is community anyway? So from a psychology perspective, the sense of community, the feeling that we have of community is a feeling of belonging to a space. You can belong to a family, you can belong to a group of friends, you can belong to a group of affinity of people. Then there is a sense that you matter to one another, meaning that your presence is actually important, that people are happy that you are there, that you matter to the group, and that the group matters to you, that is having an impact in your life. And that's the kind of things that we aim to build. This is kind of like the objective for anyone who would be trying to do community building or community design. And then finally, is this idea that the needs of the individual, not necessarily all the needs, but at least some of the needs, will be satisfied by coming together. And is that commitment to be together with one another that will help us satisfy some of the cravings that we have. So that's the idea that we're going to aim to, and then the question is how we get there. But before how we get there, let's try to understand actually what are the components of community, and we can then look at how we work on the components so community emerges as a result of our actions of working properly in the components. So in any environment, you have some individuals or agents, be it individual people or be in groups of people, organizations. Between them, you have relationships, and that creates a web of relationship, it creates a network. Within a network, you'll have some loose networks that are not very interconnected, and you'll have other networks, clusters, that are very tightly interconnected. Importantly, networks are discrete, meaning that you'll know one person, that person knows yet one another, and that person knows yet one another. So you'll always have loads of connection within the network. The important way to measure them is to think about density of connections. Then, also, people are different. So you have the network layer, the relationships, and then there is the identity layer. So we belong to different groups, and we are different kinds of people. And we can be affiliated with someone by a professional interest. We can be affiliated because we share some life experiences together, like we went to high school together. We can be affiliated because we both care a lot about the environment, or we're very interested in climbing. We can share, for example, a similar hobby, and that creates this kind of group of people. So say here we're emos, and here we had hipsters, or whatever, but then we have another hobby in common. And then perhaps some of these people actually have a kinship. So what we have is basically loads of different groups, loads of different identities juxtaposed on top of the other. And who we are is always a little bit conflicted in between these multiple identities that we have, meaning that we take different roles with different groups of people. And then we're connected within some of these group of people. So some will share the same affinity that we do, but we have never met them. Some others will share the same affinity, one of them, and we are actually in a relationship with them, in some sort of relationship. We met them, we exchanged something. And then when we have community, is when we have the two together. Is having these two components at the same time that enables that feeling of community to start being generated. Then there are other things that you can do to reinforce them, and I'm going to go into those quickly. But here is, you have the web of relationships, loads of connection, and a shared common identity. Not the only one, but at least one that brings people together. And that's what's going to become the identity of the community. So, videos, man. There we go. So here you have this gentleman here, the first one who was in the elevator. This is an experiment that's been repeated many times, and everyone else is an actor. So we usually sit in an elevator looking at the door, especially the door that's going to open next, and everyone else starts just going the other way around. And so this was repeated, as I was saying, in many, many different occasions. And in some occasions, they even asked the subject of the experiment why they turn around. And they weren't even aware they had turned around. Sometimes they are, but quite often they're not even. So I show these to explain that our environment affects us a lot. And when we talk about community design or organization design in the broader topic I'm involved in, is about creating the incentives, creating those things in the environment that will orient people towards a certain behavior. Hence, that title of social system design. Is social because it involves people, is by people, for people. System because the different elements interact with one another and they evolve over time instead of being a one-off event. And design because it's a conscious activity of creating something for a set purpose. But then that is absolutely fundamental as the design mindset, because a community is not the same thing as an organization. Sometimes they can exist at the same time. The same people who have that feeling of community can also belong to the same organization. It can even be a membership organization, which starts becoming a little bit gray, which is an organization where you have members. But the feeling of community is something else that you can create on top of that. If you frame those interactions in between the people to facilitate it to happen, if you reinforce connection and if you reinforce that group identity, then you will have community within or even across organizations. And that's when you start reaping all the other benefits I was mentioning before. That's when you have quick trust building. That's where you have value alignment. That's where you have advocacy. That's where people care for one another and actually go way beyond the normal incentives that you have put in there. That's also where you have institutionalization, meaning that's where people start caring for this group beyond the value of this group, because it becomes part of who they are, and it becomes how they define themselves by participating in this. So they will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve and sustain the existence of that community. So when we design community, we have on one side an organization that is enabling this community, say a sort of infrastructure where the people can connect, the people can interact with one another, and on the other hand, the members of the community or the people who just join. They can be the same. You can have a community made by the members for the members, or you can have a separate organization that creates that infrastructure for the community members. But then what you have, in a sense, is a platform. And that's the main thing that you have to work with. That's the element that you can mold around, that you can design to enable the community. So, like a coin, it has two sides. The side of the organization, of how the organization interacts with this platform, and how the community interacts with this platform. So roughly, the platform has 5 key areas that we can affect and that we can work with. We have boundaries and norms. That is what makes a member or not a member? What's that membrane? How does someone goes from being not being a member to becoming a member? And we can design that in multiple ways. We can make it close and create a feeling of exclusivity, which can highlight the value of being a member and hence make members feel closer related to one another because they're all part of this special group. Or we can leave it open and make it feel more inclusive. It's all about trade-offs. It's not like we have only one solution. It very much depends on what we're trying to enable. Because for every community, every group, shared identity, and this group of people who are highly connected, you also create the idea of the other, those who are not us. And that has strong consequences. So the same way you enhance trust within the community, you take away trust for strangers, unless you frame your community as being very, very open, and that's part of the identity itself. So designing those barriers will have an effect on how people perceive that and how they interact with outsiders. The other side there is norms. In general, what we refer to in organizations as culture is all the assumptions, explicit or implicit, on how one should behave. So in general, the recommendation we often make is to make those as explicit as possible. Because we suffer, even the most extrovert, from social anxiety when we are in an environment where we don't know how to relate to one another, especially for most Asian cultures. They tend to value consensus a lot, and hence it's very, very important to frame what is okay within that context, what are those interactions about, and then people will feel a lot more comfortable in this space. And they'll participate a lot more in this space, they'll keep coming back. On the other hand, if there is a lot of ambiguity, that puts a big load on the individuals to just figure out how to interact with other people. So making all these norms explicit is quite powerful. And it's not necessarily only norms that were already there, making them explicit, but just by saying what one space is about, you can change how people interact. If right now I said, okay, so this talk I'm going to talk super quickly, and if no one understands anything, then just ask your neighbor. And at the end of the talk, then suddenly it's okay to go and speak with your neighbor. Or on the other hand, I can go and say, so thank you so much for joining us in this group. Once I finish talking, I'm super happy to answer any questions. Now, suddenly you're not primed to interact with the person next to you. You're primed to interact with me. And that's how, by making those rules or guidelines explicit, you alter the behavior of all the people. So you can use that as a design element to facilitate strengthening the network, meaning more people connecting with one another, and strengthening the group identity, highlighting that thing that people have in common. And that goes into jumping already into this area of the brand and the interaction. So what's the name, the logo? How do we know that community is that community? What's its name? What's its interface? And that as a key element of what's the whole experience of this community. So how do we want this to feel like? If we wanted to be a sport community, perhaps we want it to be very upbeat. So all the interactions are going to be very energetic. Of course, when you're tired, you're not going to go into that space. But because that's a different mentality, so say if we were a company selling sports equipment, people are not going to be interested in our product when they're really tired. At that point, they probably want a pizza and a couch. But on the other hand, if we're trying to sell fast food, if we were a Netflix and so on, our community and the interactions with our community can be designed around lower energy spaces. You're going to host a party or just a gathering. You're not going to make it feel like if you were suddenly going to do sport. It's not the mindset that you're trying to promote. So it's going to be in contradiction to that feeling that you actually want, that group identity that matches your objective, that matches what the people have in common at that point. Because as I was saying, we have different identities, and it's about framing and highlighting the common identity at that particular period where people are interacting. So, personal investment is how much do you expect people to engage with this community? How long do they need to commit to be there, to be present, to do something for the others or for themselves within this space? You can leave it open. You can say, doesn't really matter, they'll commit whatever they want, but then you create some space for misunderstandings, for someone saying, oh, I'm here all the time trying to build community, or here, and you only come from time to time, so you're not really engaged. On the other hand, if we frame, like, this is a sporadic thing, guys. We're going to meet maybe once a month, or we're going to interact very little because everyone here is busy and have other things. But that's fine because we know we all care. It's just that we're busy. So you can frame those and just make sure that there is less space for misunderstandings and everyone is in the same page. And because everyone is in the same page and acting the same, then as well they feel closer related to each other, more similar to one another, more community. Finally, influence and power. Within any social group, you have power structures. You have influence. People affect one another. You can leave those implicit, and they'll just emerge over time. You'll start having not super connectors within the group, the people who know everyone else, and everyone knows them, and they start gaining power. Or on the other hand, you can make the power structures explicit and say, as you define your norms and boundaries, as you design how the interactions are, as you design the personal investment, you manage the amount of influence and power that the different individuals are. As you were saying, with community, because the objective to achieve that sense of community is to feel that we matter to the group, that the group matters to us, that we have an effect on them, and it has an effect on us, it's important that the people feel empowered to affect their community. It's not so much, if we're the organization, about just broadcasting information and saying, now you guys consume. On the other hand, it's about giving people the tools to create the community. So the organization is there to build toolkits, to facilitate interactions, to create that environment, as we were saying before, related to the video, not to do the final thing. And then, as we start growing, as that sense of community reinforced, we can use artifacts or actions to embed that identity into something that is recurrent. So we can build rituals. Religions have been the best across history to do this. And you probably know that religions have subsisted for way longer than any other sort of organization. And they do so by creating both symbols that every time you see them, they remind you of that identity, your identity that you share with the other people. They place those symbols in people's lives in different occasions. They keep running into them. And because they're embedded with meaning, they reinforce that identity, and they reinforce what people have in common. They make them feel not as strangers, but as part of a community. And then on the other hand is the rituals, the actions that they actually need to perform. Perhaps is gathering once a week and singing something. For cross-modalism, the community that I started with another group of people, being a completely open community, and we did that roughly 3 years ago, what became a ritual, and even a symbol for us, was drinking Negronis. It happened by complete accident. One of us, I can't remember who, ordered a Negroni. The others tried, and we said, that's kind of nice. And we had a Negroni. So next time we saw each other, we said, what are we going to drink? Oh, let's have a Negroni. And then the other people who were slowly joining the community, they start saying that we are all drinking Negronis. And then, slowly but surely, the Negronis start to become a common thing every time we met. And that's the key thing about symbols and rituals, is constancy, repetition. And very soon, we had other members of the community start texting us or tweeting pictures of a Negroni saying, I'm thinking about you guys. I just saw someone drinking a Negroni. That worked really well for a while. First, because it's not essential that these symbols have a value on itself, an objective on itself. It's about the identity that we place on top of them by constantly putting them there in occasions that are meaningful to us. Then, however, now that Negroni is becoming a way more popular drink, it's starting to lose its specialty. It's starting to lose its meaning. So now suddenly we drink Negronis and everyone else is drinking Negronis, so what? So it doesn't remind us of anything. The value has left. And then quickly, on the other side for the organization, we're going to have how does the organization enact those boundaries and norms? How do we actually keep them day to day? Is the brand of the organization the same as the brand of the community? That's an important trade-off, because creating the same brand means that people then are going to want to have power and influence over it. And if we don't incorporate in our decision-making process their input, then they're going to feel alienated from the community, and they're going to turn back on us. Exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do. Personal investment, that's come more of, let's make sure that we have someone dedicated to building community. We don't want to nest it within some random marketing, HR department. It's probably going to get lost within a pile of objectives. And then let's make sure that the symbols and rituals are coherent, as well as the norms, very, very coherent with what the organization stands about. Otherwise, the people are going to turn against us, and they're going to start seeing us as the other, as external to the community. So that's roughly it. If you want to learn some more, of course, you can chat. Just as a final thought, think that community is hard work. It takes time. You need to grow them organically. You need to start with a small, committed group, and then build from that over time. And that you need loads of empathy, but as well, you need leadership. It takes charisma to sell a common vision and a common identity that is worth investing the time, that is worth fighting for. Thank you.